So the title of our talk today is Faster to Master Without Disaster. I'm Pat. I'm a software development manager at Coolblue, based in Rotterdam. In case you couldn't pick it from my accent, I'm Australian. Moved here about 3 years ago. Some people see that as a disadvantage, but and can't understand why I would move here for the weather. But I'm still enjoying it, so I'm here with a good friend of mine.
My name is Pepijn. I'm been in software development for over 20 years, and I've done some bits on Commodore 64, so I've done that as well, so that's probably a bit longer. And I love building software. I love building software, and I love to have talks with people about how to build software and to how to do it in a nice way. I love to have discussions about solid and the solid principles, dependency injection. But for me, one thing is really more important than that, is that we build software for a customer. We always build software for a customer first. Once we've established what we actually build, then we can have the nice talk about technology and all these things. That to me is important and very important. As a personal note, I like baseball as a sport, and the postseason is on. I don't know the scores from last night, so I know that there's some people here who are going to ruin it. Thanks, Danny. But that's about it.
Cool. So today our talk is basically 3 sections, right? We have what do we mean, what are we talking about, because the title of the talk was a little bit abstract.
Yep.
Right? Why would you want to do this? Why would you want to push value to master faster and avoid disaster? And then how do we actually propose you do that? And some of the suggestions that we have from working for a while. So let's start with the what. Yeah, nice, simple, straightforward. We'll clarify everything. Make everyone feel a bit better.
Yep. Well, presentation was fairly clear. Faster to master without disaster. For me, it rolls off the tongue, right? And I wanted to do this in a robot voice, but I've been told that's not very cool to do, so I'm not going to do that.
Not this time.
But still, faster to master without disaster. And there's 3 elements to that. And the first one is faster.
Yeah. For me, faster straight away means automated deployments to production, right? You're trying to deliver your value, get it straight, in this case, out of the plane, piece after piece, time after time, over and over again. Nice and really quick. Continuous delivery, basically.
Then there's a timing aspect. We're saying faster, and deploying stuff to production should be in minutes. So we're talking minutes here. We're not talking about doing something where you build on your software and you're actually waiting for 3 months to build a package and then deliver that to production. This is minutes. This is deployment of what you have actually built to production straight away. If you can do it in seconds, even better. So seconds is better, but we're just talking about minutes. That's what we think as a baseline is fine.
When we talk about master today, obviously it has Git connotations, but we don't actually mean master being the master branch. We don't care what you call it, right? You can call it deploy, you can call it main, you can in VSTS use other terminology, but when we talk about today, when we're talking about getting code into master, we're talking about making it generally available, making one branch your main branch or your main repository.
And obviously what you want is you want no disaster. And one key element to that is a code review. You want to do a code review before code actually goes to master. 1 point, right? Code review. And that could be automatic. It could also be a peer review, 2 guys actually doing something. So that's very important to do it without disaster.
Yep. Another key aspect that we'll go into a little bit deeper is automation, right? So without disaster, we need to focus on automation. And I'm not necessarily talking about automated CI or automated CD or anything like that. I'm talking about automation all the way through the process, right? As humans, we all make mistakes. We've all made mistakes, let's be honest. But yeah, introducing automation into your build pipeline, making sure that you can push that code faster into master. You need automation to avoid the disaster.
Then monitoring is also important in this. How do you know that your application is actually behaving correctly in production? You don't know. Sometimes you don't know. I've built software in the past when I've actually handed over a packet to somebody else and they deployed it on production, and I don't know how it behaves. I don't know. I get really etsy about that. I want to know how it works. I want to have health on my application. I want to know whether my endpoints are correctly behaving in terms of timing. This is what I want to know. So monitoring is the key aspect to drive to actually know that your application is doing what it's supposed to be doing.
So if you have all this code going faster, going to master, right? No more disasters. You're going to end up with this, right? No more disaster. Cool. It's been 5 minutes or so, right? Talk's over, right? We're done. That's all you need to know,
Yep. Done.
right? But
Surely you have some questions now, right?
just don't call me Shirley.
That-
See, told you you'd grown, right?
But you guys must think we're crazy, right? This is what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can we go to production with all our code just in under minutes? This is not possible. This is not possible in my domain. You guys are crazy. No, that part's true, but this is possible.
One of the counters of this is we keep on hearing excuses, right? Pepijn and I have worked in a number of different companies. In your role now, you're seeing many, many different clients or as a consultant. So every time we bring this to people, they say, yeah, this is all well and good. This is a great story, but I can't do this. This doesn't work for me because, and so we want to try and wipe some of those excuses away for you. The first one that we keep on hearing over and over again, right, is that you fall back on the rules of Scrum. And Scrum says you need a potentially releasable product at the end of each sprint, right? Scrum also says nothing about delivering sooner than the end of the sprint. It just says you also need something done by the end of the sprint. So from our point of view, this is almost a non-starter, right? If you can deliver it within a few hours of starting the sprint, even better.
And one of the other things is that you always have somebody in a company who says, yeah, I need to approve this, right? Before you and your code go to production, I need to rubber stamp it. And it could be a guy somewhere in a building somewhere outside of your domain. And you go over to him, you say, oh, I want to release my software. And he'll go, yeah, what does it do? Yeah, do I need to explain it to you now? Do I need to explain the whole context to you? He's just holding up the line. It doesn't really help. It doesn't really help in anything. So we have all these people who are actually in the process want to somehow be made aware of all these things and saying you have a new release. There's a database administrator who says, I need to be notified when you do changes. This is stuff that's holding you back from going to production. And there's actually techniques to actually reverse that, because if you reverse it, then you can go to production sooner.
Yep. One of my personal favorites that I keep on hearing time and time again is, I can't do this, this won't work for me because I can't touch production. And if I'm pushing code to production faster and faster and faster, I want to make sure that it's landing in the environment appropriately, right, with the right config settings and all this sort of stuff. And my standard answer to that is no person should ever touch production, right? No human should be involved in this. You should fall back on your tooling, you should fall back on your automation, you should make sure that only your tools have access or the appropriate access for production.
Then there's environments, right? We have multiple environments in place for you to actually push your code to. So we have DTAP, we call this OTAP in the Netherlands. So we have a development and a testing and acceptance and a production environment. And before we go to production, all the code all has to go through these different environments. Somebody needs to press a button, somebody needs to approve, somebody needs to do this, somebody needs to test this. These systems are there to actually help us, but it doesn't feel like it's actually helping us. All these different environments actually make us go slower because we have to wait for that person to actually accept it on the acceptance environment or do their testing on the testing environment. These environments should be there to actually help us, but they're not helping us.
Similar to the approval process, one thing that we keep on hearing, especially now with things like walled gardens with specific fruit branded products or in special industries sometimes, I need my code. It's all well and good that I do my bit really, really fast and I can give that to my certifier really, really fast, but he's still going to take days, weeks to certify it, right? So what's the point? Surely I can just aggregate a whole bunch of changes and hand it off to him weekly for approval, right? And as Pepijn mentioned in regards to the approval slide, right, there is tooling that you can implement from our point of view to make this faster, right? Obviously you can't change the behavior of an external company. You can't change sometimes these certifications are mandated by law, and that's not things you can shortcut, but we can still believe that you can deliver value faster, deliver code into master, and have it available for them in a much, much faster manner.
Then there's the application landscape complexity. So there's somebody sitting there who's actually an infrastructure team, and the guy says, but our landscape is really complex. If I let you developers actually touch our complicated landscape, then that's not going to work out well. The counter argument would be, Yeah, but if the application landscape is complex, it means it's complex for you as well. And how do you manage that? You get an infrastructure team that grows and you can't do anything with that, and you need more people to actually manage it. But the infrastructure is there to actually help us to deliver our software. So this is weird, right? This is weird. This should be automated, and then we can actually start helping each other to actually deploy the software to production faster.
And the last one we have for this section, the biggest excuse that I hear of all, right? Change is hard, right? This is great. I love this. I've been so energized by TechDays. I'm going to go back, and on Monday I'm going to tell everyone in my organization that this is something we need to do. But then my boss is just going to say no, right? Like, back to square one, right? I agree. Change is hard, right? Changing other people even harder, right? But unless you start with these ideas or these principles or some of the things we're going to show you today, then you're never going to make that any better, right? At least today, hopefully, if you're using this as an excuse, my company is slow and difficult and it's impossible to change, then at least if you go back to your organization and try, maybe something will come out of that.
And obviously there's a big reason why we're doing this. And one of the key reasons why we're actually doing this is to avoid complex plannings. We want to avoid complex planning on versions. Remember everything, people actually start to plan versions out and saying that we want to have feature X, Y, and Z in this version, and then this version can actually have those features in there, but that version is dependent on this, and that version is dependent on that. Then you get a whole release schedule, which is very difficult to actually maintain. Because as we all know, planning never goes right. We start developing something on a feature, and then it doesn't make the cut of the release, and if you're only releasing your product every 6 months, it's not going to be released in that cycle for 6 months. That means that your customer is waiting for that feature for another 6 months. This is not very fast. It doesn't sound very fast. You can do without this, as far as I'm concerned, because the most important thing you should be doing is working on the features that are most valuable to your customers. If you work on those firsthand, and it will be delivered firsthand as well, and then it will always be available to your customer sooner than they even expect.
I know that this one's quite technical, but I also know that half of the people that I know here are developers, so this will make sense, right? If you're going faster to master and you're working off a generally available branch, right, and you're constantly committing back to that and making your changes available for everyone else, complex mergers like, oh, I've had this feature branch open for 3 months, and now I've got 70 files and 60,000 lines changed because everyone else thinks that they need to do the refactoring as well. That doesn't exist anymore, right? If you're working much more collaborative, much more closer to your colleagues in this case, not only does it foster a whole bunch of other ancillary benefits, right? But technically speaking, it also makes your life a lot easier.
And then there's the overhead part, right? I'm not talking about overhead in terms of people. I'm just saying you need to go around those. You can just, sure, there's overhead in people you can have in your organization as well. That's.
I'm surprised you didn't mention the development manager joke. Thank you.
Well, you just did.
Thank you.
But there's all these people involved in your process, right? You're building your software as a team, and then it needs to go through some big, complicated maze for you to actually go to production. To me, that doesn't make any sense, because as a team, you're working on something. You need to ask approval from an architect. You need to ask approval from your development manager. You need to ask approval from your technical tester. I don't understand these systems. If you actually start doing this on your own and you say, okay, I'm taking the responsibility of going to production, master, faster, I own it, and I can just skip all this stuff. Skip it. Not necessary.
Not necessary. I promise this is the only slide with my employer's logo on it. But at Coolblue, for those of you that know Coolblue, we have a mindset in development, right? Not just in development, in the whole company, to make. Ready? Elke dag een beetje beter. Yeah? Hey! I did it. It's only taken me 3 years. By that, for those of you that don't speak Dutch, and for those of you that couldn't understand my poor Dutch, I mean to make every day a little bit better, right? And for Coolblue, this goes for our customers. I'm going to stop talking as Coolblue in a second. But it also goes in our development environment, right? If you're constantly delivering code into your end users, right, then you are making every day a little bit better. If you're committing code every day, then every day that code base is becoming richer. Some may say poorer if you're making bad decisions, but at least every day you're heading in the right direction. Every day.
And there's also a great feeling when you're working on a team. And to me, this is the most important thing. You're working as a team, not by the fire, I hope, but you're working as a team on your feature, and you're going fast. You're going fast, and we all have difficulties in our job, and something actually doesn't go right. You're working on something with 5 people, and you're working, and you're trying to make the sprint, and you actually make it. That's a very powerful feeling. That's people actually getting together, people actually delivering something. That's a great feeling. Now, of course, there's situations where you have to hand over the stuff to somebody else, and that would be the inverse to me. It wouldn't be the empowering person as well. It wouldn't be very empowering if you've worked on something for 2 weeks and you say, okay, let me just hand it over to the DevOps engineer, and he'll actually do the deployment to production. And you go, hang on, DevOps engineer, why is that person responsible for actually deploying my software? I want to do that myself. I've actually labored very hard on this. I've worked really hard with my teammates, and I want to have this moment to actually own it, and I actually want this to go to production. And then you have your kumbaya moment, right? If it actually works, then you're sitting there with the fire and your guitar and you're singing songs.
Maybe you do. I'm not that close to my guys anymore. It's sad.
True.
For me, the biggest part of why you want this from end to end and wholeheartedly in your organization is because you want to deliver value as fast as possible, right? As developers, yes, we get paid a salary, normally by an organization, and we're quite detached often from what our actual end users mean and what they need. But for me, if you're not delivering value as fast as you can, then you're almost doing yourself a disservice. If you can, in this case, deliver a package to people on an island, right, they're not going to appreciate it if you're sitting there hovering above them telling them that it's available. If you can push it straight out the plane as soon as it's available, they're going to be much, much happier, right? It's a poor, crude analogy, but I think you guys understand. So that's all well and good, right? And we've given you the common excuses we hear, and hopefully we've given you some counters that you can use for other people that will now give you those excuses. We've stepped through the why you would want to do this. Hopefully you're all feeling nice and motivated, and yes, I do want to do all these things. I want to have my kumbaya moment. But how? How do I actually get this done?
Well, this is about the circle of life, right?
Sorry, he left me alone with the slide deck last night, and I inserted this one just to mess him up. So my apologies. He means this one.
This is the circle of life.
Yes.
This is our circle of life, right? This is for developers what we do. There's 4 stuff in there. We're developing our software, we're testing our software, we're deploying it, and we're monitoring the software. And this is a continuous cycle. It's iterative. Great picture there. This is how we actually operate on a day-to-day basis.
When we make that actually concrete though, right, for me, the first part of the process is developing, and in development, if we're talking faster to master, you should have very short-lived branches, right? There's no more feature branch that exists for 3 months that you're trying and struggling to do things in and trying to merge changes back and all sorts of stuff. That doesn't happen anymore. You start your day with a task, presumably. You work on that task in a separate branch, or however your mechanism for working is. You commit that back, you hand it back to someone else, and then you can get rid of that. That's an artifact that you no longer need because the code is now available.
Now, obviously, that doesn't work if you're working on a feature that actually spans over more than 1 day, because sometimes you're working on something which is really big. It could mean that you're working on a feature which hopefully takes smaller time than your sprint, but it could mean that you're working on something that should be open for a couple of days. There's mechanisms for that, and it's feature toggles. I think you've all know this. But a feature toggle is basically just an if statement saying that if this situation is true, then I'll show this piece of code in production or an acceptance environment or somewhere else. And you can play with that. You can give certain people access in your feature toggle to actually make sure that somebody else can look at your feature while you're still developing it. This is one way you can actually make sure that your code still goes to master, but it's not going to be effectively running in production for maybe your end customers or your end users, but it's still there. And all your code is still there, and all your code is still running there with tests, right? Unit tests, all these other things are still running. So in master, everything is still in there, but it's disabled for certain people. And that could be your end users.
Pepijn touched on this a little bit in his slide, right? For me, the next biggest part of developing is that you have automated analysis, right? Now, there's plenty of different tools for this. There's linters for, obviously for .NET languages, right? You have the fact that it compiles. That's a nice added bonus. But all sorts of automated analysis can be added into your pipeline to give you that faith or that trust, to steal from the keynote this morning, that faith, there we go, that you're actually delivering, right? The fact that you're delivering good stuff that works, matches what you expect it to do. If you're doing things like acceptance tests, which, yeah, we'll dive into a little bit later. Sorry, that's a spoiler, my bad. Then, yeah, if those are automatically processed using all sorts of development tools that I'm sure you're familiar with, then yeah, you can have a lot more faith in the code that you're writing.
Well, I'm talking about the faith thing. This is a peer review, right? Because the tools won't catch everything. The tools will not be able to actually see that you've done something horribly wrong to a database. It will just do static analysis or do a linter, or it will actually pick up on the fact that you've not sorted your using statements, or that sort of stuff, which is braces on the line, on the same line, on the next line, whether you do ifs around it. That's all part of automated tooling. And then there's this process. And to me, this is a sacred process, right? These guys are together sitting behind a machine actually looking at the code they want to push to master. And this is not a review being done, just somebody reviewing a pull request or maybe some other review form in terms of a digital thing. It's not sitting behind a machine actually typing all the comments. It's two people sitting together. Because it's humans, right? We're humans. This is what we do. We talk about the code and we talk why we're doing this. And I know it's easy to sit behind your machine and actually send somebody a Slack message saying that, you've made a mistake here, you've done this wrong and that sort of stuff. But that doesn't help. It's not very friendly and it doesn't feel as if you're working together on a good product. This works best. Sitting together, doing it together, look at the screen, and come to a conclusion on what is good code or bad code. This is what it's about.
And for those of us that have had the beauty of working with Pepijn, this is the slide that you show back at him when he puts hashtag no on your pull request, right? It's
only happened once.
True, it only needed to happen once. It hurts, man. So this brings us to the next stage, right? The next piece of the circle of life, not the little Lion King one, but the actual real one that we've come up with, and that is testing. Right. You've all seen a pyramid similar to this, right? And if you haven't seen this sort of stuff before, I'm sure you can understand where I'm going with this, right? You start with unit tests. There are many, many unit tests, testing small, individual pieces of your code, right? No external influence, normally just checking for logic. These are high in number. I don't say the number anymore, but these are high in number, and these are able to be run very, very quick, right? If we go back to the automated tooling, your automated tooling should be able to pick these up and run them while you're developing on the feature that you're trying to implement, right? If you're doing things like red-green refactor, even better, right? But for me, it all starts with having a really, really wide base of unit tests.
And the one level up is the module test, right? So all these individual things we test in the unit test, we put them together and we actually make sure that as a module they work together. Because there's multiple components involved. I'm sure we don't build one component, one big thing, and we unit test that, because that wouldn't be very good. So this is probably in C# land as one big project or something. There's a project, could be a web API project, for example. You go through the whole logic and you actually go down to the lowest layer, but you actually mock out your lowest layer, right? Because this is stuff you want to run on your development machine. It's great power if you have a lot of these tests as well. They're smaller in number than a unit test, but you're working on your feature and you actually make sure that what you're building, because you're always touching existing code, doesn't affect other code, it doesn't break other code, so you want to run this on your local machine. All mocked out with web services you go over. If you have a database dependencies, you mock out that as well. That's what you do in module testing. And the integration test is one level up, right? So let's assume we have an application which calls multiple web services. You want to make sure that those actually behave correctly together as a whole as well. And that means you could be either choosing a pattern where you're saying that you're going to mock out those dependencies as well from an application point of view, Or it could mean that you're deploying it on an application which is actually somewhere sitting on a machine where you're working with mock data or a real database. Makes it a bit harder if you want to do it with a real database and you have a large application landscape. So I would hopefully say that you want to do this with a lot of mocked and prepared data. But this is the integration test. Make sure that your application still works together with all your individual components. And there's still a lot of them, but less than the other one, obviously.
Yep.
And then end-to-end test. This is about making sure from a regression point of view that your business process you've implemented and is the most important thing for your end customers is still working. Because that's really important. You've touched something and you want to make sure that since it's going to production really fast, it actually doesn't break other stuff. So we have end-to-end test in that. So it's a business process thing. It's a modern thing to actually call it use cases because DDD is actually making it more important. So your use case or your business process on what is really key and vital to you is in your end-to-end test. And you won't have many of them. That's just because your application can only handle so much. So there's not going to be that many of them.
And no pyramid is complete without a top, right? But a few of you that are maybe a little bit closer to the front can see that that's actually dashed out, and we don't have a description of that. For this, we're talking about things like manual testing, right? But for us, that's not a part of the testing process. That's a part of the post-deployment verification process that's not part of your pipeline, right? This is things like user acceptance testing that's done way, way outside the scope of your development. It's part of your development process in your company or in your organization, part of your development process life cycle, right? The SDLC, going back to university stuff, right? But this is not important in terms of getting your code faster to master, in our opinion.
And the third part is deployment, or deploying, right? That's part of the circle life as well, because we want our code to actually be deployed on a machine somewhere.
And the key part for this, for me, is that you've got a nice big fat pipe. This is a massive big fat water pipe, I believe, going through the Australian desert, pumping code as quick as it can from left to right, right? Large enough for you not to be blocked by it. It needs to, and obviously you might need some help with this. I'm looking at my colleagues in the back that are smirking at me, knowing the challenges that we're going through at the moment, but having a nice big fat automated pipeline going straight to production. And now I've spoiled your one.
No, that's fine. Straight to production. Boom. No, but it's key, right? Because everything we build want to go to production. Remember, we still have the feature toggles in place, so every change we make could be a small refactoring, could be doing a implementation of a bug, could be preparation for a feature, could be parts of a feature, straight to production. Boom.
The next bit that builds on top of that, the part that would make your deployment process ideal, in my mind, is having your infrastructure scripted, right, or having it available to you. There's many different ways to describe this. Some people use infrastructure as code or immutable infrastructure, blue-green deployments. There's lots of different names for this, but having it so that your infrastructure, your deployment infrastructure is actually automatable is also key in actually having success in this. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yep. Final part is the monitoring. Fourth part, and we have a couple of things for that.
Yep. So you mean this, right? This is what we're talking about, right? My app just started?
No, no, I don't mean this. There's a lot of people actually doing this,
right?
right?
That was cheesy. That was
What?
good. That was good. That was cheesy. We prepared that well.
Yeah. This to me is what happens at most places, right? I see this all the time. People are actually logging stuff. They're saying, I've done this. My application just booted. I am now here in my application. This to me has nothing to do with monitoring because it doesn't say anything. You don't know what's going on. And if you want to know if your application is still running, you don't know. You're going to have to go through log files, which are tons and tons and tons of log files. I've seen situations where these individual lines are actually sent as an email to somebody. And like, what are you going to do with these things? There's nothing you can do with this. So to me, this is not monitoring.
Yep. So when we are talking about monitoring, then the inverse of that is defining your key metrics. Right? We have a guy at Coolblue that's really, really good at this. he basically walks around and helps us to identify exactly where our key metrics are in terms of making our customers, be they internal users or our actual customers, happier, right? We need to monitor and maintain those key metrics.
Because you don't want to be this guy, right? This could be me in the development team. I've actually pushed something to production, and I get a phone call. Somebody saying, your application isn't working correctly. You've done something wrong. This is a very, very embarrassing moment, because somebody outside from your development team who's actually built something is telling you that your software is not working. This is bad, right? The guy is very uncomfortable, so that's really what you want to avoid. You want to be proactive about that. Be the first to know. Because then your dashboard looks like this. This is my ideal dashboard, right? We've seen all sorts of teams in rooms somewhere, and they all have their big monitors up. And this is, to me, what I want to see in the monitors. I don't want to see those log files with all these text things coming through. This is what I want to see. Green dashboard all day long.
But that doesn't always work out. Right? And one of the things that I've spoken about a few times in the past is that failure is always an option, right? Especially if you have a lot of the other stuff in place that we've been talking about today, a fast automated pipeline, automated testing, right? Bugs, in my opinion, are things that we haven't tested for yet. I think that's a safe way to put it,
Yep.
right? Failure at Coolblue is always an option, and we've implemented this as a mindset.
You've implemented failure.
Yeah, in small doses, yeah.
Ah,
Because for us at Coolblue, it looks like this, right? You have failures, but they're well contained. One guy can jump on it, put it out in a matter of minutes. It's a problem that's now been solved. Hopefully you have a test that now covers for that eventuality, because you've now proven that it's going to happen. This is what it looks like.
and this is what it looks like on my monitor in my team when something is wrong. It's red, because somebody needs to take action. I don't want to see some nice spinning graph saying that my CPU time is now taking out, or CPU is being overloaded with 70% of the time. I don't care about that. I want to know it's red. And this is actionable. Somebody needs to fix this, right? Because it needs to go back to green. So something needs to happen. Somebody needs to either look in the code base, or probably they have monitors up there, all the key metrics you're measuring, saying, okay, this is what's wrong. That means I need to change this on my situation to get the dashboard green again. And as Pat said as well, it's very important that this actually means that you've missed a test, right? Because we push something to production and something is wrong. Something is wrong and we need to change something. But that means that we've probably missed a test situation, we've misconfigured something with deployment, so we need to change something.
Yeah. And I think overall, for all of the monitoring, right, for the whole subject, and even broader than that, for this whole talk that we're talking about here, if you make something, you own it. I firmly believe this needs to be a part of the mindset of a developer that's implementing these sorts of practices, right? If you've written code and you deploy it at 5:30 on a Friday and it breaks, you better be ready to listen to your big red dashboard, this one, yeah?
Yep.
And jump back in and write a test that fixes that, right? Conversely, or the inverse of that, is that if you've got all this automated tooling, all this testing, you've written the code, you're happy with it, you're able to deploy it really, really fast and able to deploy fixes really, really fast, then you should have no problem with this, right? You should be proud, as Pepijn's Kumbaya moment demonstrated before, right? You should be proud that the code that's running in a production environment is yours. And so now we're done. We've completed the whole loop. We've developed something. We've tested it. We've deployed it. We're now monitoring it. Something breaks. We start the loop again, right? We develop a fix for it, test it. You can see how this can now apply. And we're talking a time frame of minutes.
Yep. Now, obviously, you want to go away tomorrow and do something and change your whole process. But there's no real master plan I can give you, right? This is all, you're working in an environment where you have databases, you have all these servers, everything is in place, your processes are in place, but there's no clear guideline on what to do. There's no master plan I can give you to actually say, okay, just implement all these things and you're done. There is no master plan.
But there is, ready? A faster to master plan. Come
Wow.
on. But soft humor, right? This is basically the summation of everything we've spoken about today, right? We put check marks in there. The design guys at the Microsoft, you know, the guy that made the template probably isn't going to be very happy about this.
Yep.
But we put the check marks in there so that you can, thank you, take a photo or print it, right? The slides will become available, and check these off. If you've got each and every one of these boxes checked, I think there's only 16 of them. Yep. If you're doing this, then you should be able to go faster to master without disaster, right?
Yep.
Sorry, hold on. There we go. I think a few more people need the photo. No? All right. I'll put it up at the end.
And this is possible, right? You can do this. You can do this. To me, this is a way of working I would like to see in all my development teams because it's very empowering. As I said, the kumbaya moment, you're actually proud of everything you make. You're proud of the fact that you're owning it. Testing is all in place. And you're actually making sure that everything works in production for your end users. And that could mean sometimes that you get a phone call saying that something is wrong. Could be in the middle of the night if that depends on your company. Could be in the weekend. But you're still fixing it and you're fixing your own code. That's very empowering. And this is all very possible. But
so that brings us to the end. Yeah? We don't need to go over the Shirley joke anymore,
nope.
do we? No, okay, cool. So this is what we have prepared. I'll put the slide up of the checkboxes after. The slides will also be available online. But does anyone here have any questions for us while we're up here? Apart from you two. You know who you are. Yeah? So, to recap the question for those that may not have heard it, with the peer review, do you functionally test the code as well, or are you just looking over it, basically? That's, yeah?
I would say that functionally I'm not testing it. I'm looking at coding and coding guidelines, and what it actually does is what we agreed upon, right? That's what we do. I do want to see a working copy of it, but that sometimes takes a lot of time, right? That's what it does. There should be unit tests in place, so I'm actually looking at your chain set. I'm actually making sure that the unit tests actually cover these things. And there's also other integration tests and a module test in place to make sure that the whole feature works as well. The peer reviews I like to do is actually try to go over to somebody's machine and then they can actually show me, because that's the greatest thing as well. Guy has a pull request made out, all these changes, and I go, okay, could we maybe run this? That's certainly possible. Don't do it all the time, but it's certainly possible.
Anyone else? Yeah?
So how do you keep your code base from becoming a mess with all this feature toggle logic spread out all over the place?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we, I'm just repeating it for the guys that are listening outside and that sort of stuff. How do we keep the code base from becoming cluttered with feature toggles? Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for me, it takes a lot of discipline, right? That being said, if you're developing code at a very high rate, then it shouldn't take long for that feature toggle to come back out of your code base, right? So it is putting a bit of onus on the developer to be disciplined, right? Knowing that you've got a feature toggle in there that you don't need anymore, that should come out immediately, I would say, right? Or in the last pull request to enable the feature, something like that. But yes, for things that, if you're working on very long-running code bases with very many complex things, I would advise you to check out a talk that Donovan Brown gives about how Microsoft and the VSTS tool itself, which is many, many, many lines of code, actually uses feature toggles and this sort of a development mindset with the distributed teams.
I've actually made work items for these things, saying that, okay, please don't forget to actually remove this this feature toggle in 2 months' time, just to make sure that once it's gone in production and you've actually got the new version of the code running, the older stuff isn't disabled anymore. Make sure that you clean it up. So it has a bit of handling there.
Cool. Yeah. Sure. Yep. So the question was, we skip the top part of the triangle, the manual testing, the user testing, that sort of stuff. Why do we skip that? And is there not value in that? I think is the inferred question as well. I think, yes, there is value in having your users test your application, right? I'm not saying that your users and their experience doesn't matter, because that's primarily why you're paid in the first place. But the process of having that involved in your pipeline could be covered off, in my opinion, by a combination of very high-level end-to-end tests, right? The integration tests, the use cases that we were talking about, so very high-level automated testing, and a combination of feature flags if you have things that actually need to be proven by a human. But in my mind, that is such a small number of things that, yeah, why wouldn't you have an end-to-end test that covers off what the human is trying to do in this case? So you would answer that business requirement, the value that you're trying to deliver there, in making sure that your code is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but you would do that in an automated way with possibly a pretty complex test.
And to add to that, for me that actually makes it simpler, right? Because if you're automating these things, it's all of a sudden involved while you're developing the feature. So you don't have to wait for somebody to actually say, oh, I'm going to start acceptance testing my software by clicking on this, this, and this, because this is the important scenario. If as a development team you already know what the guy is going to test, that's for me great. That's going to be an end-to-end test I'm going to implement, which I'm going to be glad there is, because then I know that the feature actually works. So moving it forward is, for me, very helpful.
Yeah?
About the monitoring, you restrict your key metrics on the code you have influence over, or is it over the whole landscape?
You want to take this one, mate? So the question was basically, for the key metrics, do they cover just your code, or do they cover everyone's code? If you're working in sort of a multi-team environment, I imagine you're talking about.
Yeah, we are at the back of the chain. So
Right.
if someone at the top of the chain breaks code, then we immediately see that. So yeah,
Right.
we action on those, or
Right. So our friend here is in an awkward position where you're the last person in a chain of deployed applications, right? And so for me, I think there's two, at Coolblue at least, there's many teams developing many different apps. Some are in the same situation. There's also infrastructure that we deploy that, you know, satisfies a whole bunch of teams, and that this question sort of applies there as well. And I think the answer is you need to own your stuff 100%, right? You need to be 100% happy that your code is not the one causing the fault, and if it is, you have a very well-defined point where it is. But you should also, let's say, keep an eye on other people or other failures within the domain, or within the company or the organization, or however it's structured in your case. So in the way this is implemented in some of the teams that we have at my current work is you'll have your primary dashboard, the majority of it's green, massive green screen, very happy, and then you'll normally have just dependencies listed off to the left-hand side, for example. So if RabbitMQ disappears, you can rest assured that the team that actually owns RabbitMQ in this case is rapidly fixing that for you, or should be, if they have this mentality. But that any cascading faults that are in your domain that are a direct result of that could also be explained that way. So it's not your responsibility to jump up and fix the failing infrastructure in this case, but you can still be aware of it, or you should still be aware of it, because it's a dependency that you have. Yeah, so the question is, could I give concrete examples of the metrics? Without giving too much away, easy things to monitor are things like timings. So you would expect this call to take X number of milliseconds, microseconds, whatever, right? Seconds sometimes. You would expect this number of calls to come over a certain time period on average. Yeah, when you actually start defining what key metrics are in your organization, it's basically what's going to make, it's measuring the inverse, right? So what is going to happen that's going to make my customers have a bad experience, or my users have a bad experience, and then measuring to make sure that those inverses don't happen. I think it was a bit convoluted,
Yeah.
but cool. It's getting quite hot in here, and I think we've only got 30 seconds left. So yeah, we might call it there. If you've got any other questions, come see either of us. We'll be wandering around. We'd love to have a chat with you about this. Thanks for coming. And for those of you that want the slide, there you go.
Yep.